The loneliest doors are never locked to keep strangers out, they are locked to keep grief from escaping. The rain arrived long before dusk, turning the winding roads across the limestone plateau of central Kentucky into rivers of mud and silver reflections. Every passing wagon hurried toward shelter, every porch light disappeared behind thick curtains, and every respectable traveler had already found a roof before the storm swallowed the countryside. Eliza Hartwell had done everything she could to outrun the weather, clutching the carefully wrapped black morning gown against her chest as if protecting it mattered more than protecting herself. The expensive silk beneath the oilcloth belonged to one of the wealthiest families in the county, and although she had stitched every delicate seam with steady hands, it would never truly belong to her world. She was only the seamstress trusted to finish impossible work under impossible deadlines. When the carriage carrying her from Marlowe's dress house reached the old stone bridge leading toward Blackridge Abbey, the horses stopped abruptly. The driver climbed down, stared into the roaring flood below, and quietly muttered a prayer. Half the bridge had vanished beneath the raging water. Huge chunks of ancient stone disappeared one after another into the swollen river, while broken tree trunks spun through the current like forgotten toys. "That's the end of the road," the driver announced. "Nobody's crossing tonight." Eliza stepped down carefully, rain soaking through her worn boots within seconds. "Can you wait until morning?" she asked, already knowing the answer. The man shook his head. "I've got a family 10 miles south. If I stay here, they'll think I'm dead by sunrise." He unloaded her small suitcase, handed it to her with genuine regret, tipped his hat, and climbed back into the carriage. Within moments, both horses disappeared into the gray curtain of rain, leaving only fading hoofbeats behind. Eliza stood alone beside the flooded crossing, one hand gripping her suitcase, the other protecting the gown beneath her cloak. Behind her, the only road stretched toward Blackridge Abbey, the sprawling estate rising above the cliffs like a forgotten monastery carved from the mountain itself. Its weathered stone towers disappeared into the mist while narrow Gothic windows reflected brief flashes of lightning. Stories about the place had traveled through every sewing room and marketplace in 3 counties. Some claimed the Duke who lived there had sealed entire wings of the estate after a family tragedy. Others insisted no celebrations, music, or weddings had taken place inside those walls for nearly a decade. Most people simply lowered their voices whenever his name entered a conversation. Gideon Holloway. Eliza had never expected to meet him. She had only planned to deliver the morning gown, collect her payment, and return before sunset. Fate, however, rarely honored careful plans. The steep path leading to the abbey became slick beneath her feet, forcing her to climb slowly while rainwater streamed from her dark hair and sleeves. By the time she reached the enormous oak doors, every thread of her dress clung to the cold, and her fingers trembled from exhaustion rather than fear. She lifted the heavy iron knocker with both hands and struck it twice. The sound echoed through the stone walls before silence swallowed it again. Several long moments passed. Finally, the door opened just enough for an elderly man holding a lantern to study her face. His silver hair framed sharp but gentle features, and his dark coat bore the quiet dignity of someone who had served the same household for decades. "Good evening," he said cautiously. "Blackridge Abbey is not receiving visitors." Eliza lowered her eyes respectfully. "My name is Eliza Hartwell. I was sent from Marlowe's dress house with Lady Holloway's morning gown." The butler's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "You were expected hours ago. The storm arrived faster than anyone predicted." He glanced toward the rain pounding across the courtyard before stepping aside just enough to allow her into the entrance hall. Warm air wrapped around her immediately, carrying the faint scent of cedarwood, old books, and extinguished candles. Marble floors stretched beneath vaulted ceilings supported by towering arches that looked more suited to an ancient cathedral than a private residence. Everything felt quiet enough to hear time itself breathing. "I'm Warren Bellamy," the butler said. "Leave the package with me. I'll see that it reaches His Grace." Eliza carefully handed over the wrapped gown before asking the question she had dreaded since the bridge collapsed. "Is there an inn nearby?" Warren hesitated. "Not within 15 miles. Another bridge?" "Underwater," She nodded once, accepting the answer without complaint. Then perhaps a stable? A carriage shed? Anywhere I could remain until morning. Genuine regret softened the old man's face. Construction crews repairing the eastern levee have occupied every servant's room. Even the carriage house is full. Before either of them could speak again, measured footsteps echoed from the shadows beyond the grand staircase. The atmosphere itself seemed to straighten. A tall man emerged from the dim corridor dressed entirely in black, his broad shoulders framed by the glow of distant lamps. His expression revealed nothing, yet his gray eyes carried the unmistakable weight of someone who had spent years speaking only when absolutely necessary. Gideon Holloway stopped several feet away, his gaze resting first on the soaked suitcase, then on the rainwater pooling beneath Eliza's boots, before finally meeting her eyes. No one spoke. The silence stretched so long that even the storm outside seemed quieter. Eliza drew one slow breath, refusing to let desperation strip away the last pieces of her dignity. "Please, Your Grace," she said softly. "I have nowhere to sleep." Gideon Holloway did not answer immediately. The silence lingered beneath the vaulted ceiling until the steady rhythm of rain against stained glass became louder than breathing itself. Warren Bellamy lowered his eyes, waiting for the familiar refusal that usually followed unexpected requests. The Duke rarely welcomed guests, and no stranger had crossed beyond the entrance hall without careful reason in many years. Gideon continued studying the young woman standing before him. Her cloak was soaked through, her boots left small pools across the polished marble, and loose strands of chestnut hair clung to her pale face. Yet she neither pleaded nor cried. She simply stood with quiet dignity, as though asking for shelter had already cost more pride than she wished anyone to witness. Finally Gideon spoke. "There are no vacant rooms." Warren looked up in quiet agreement, believing the matter settled. Then the Duke reached into the pocket of his dark coat and withdrew a single iron key attached to a faded black ribbon. The old butler's expression changed instantly. "Your Grace," he said carefully, almost whispering. "Surely not that room." Gideon closed his hand around the key. "Bring another lantern." Warren hesitated for only a heartbeat before obeying. Eliza remained motionless, uncertain whether she had misunderstood what was happening. The Duke turned toward the western corridor without another explanation. "Come with me, Miss Hartwell." His voice carried no warmth, yet neither did it carry reluctance. It sounded instead like someone accepting a duty long postponed. Eliza lifted her small suitcase and quietly followed him through the enormous estate. The entrance hall gradually disappeared behind them as they entered a wing where the air felt noticeably cooler. Portraits lined the stone walls, their gilded frames softened beneath years of untouched dust. White sheets covered several pieces of furniture like silent ghosts preserving forgotten conversations. Their footsteps echoed beneath arched ceilings while candlelight stretched long shadows across the ancient floor. No servants appeared. No doors opened. It seemed this entire section of Blackridge Abbey had been abandoned to memory alone. After several minutes they reached the private family chapel. The heavy oak doors stood partly open, revealing rows of empty pews illuminated by dozens of unlit candles. Moonlight occasionally slipped through colored glass whenever lightning flashed beyond the storm clouds. At the far end stood a simple stone altar, untouched by fresh flowers or recent ceremonies. Gideon walked past it without slowing. Behind the altar hung a curtain of dark velvet embroidered with faded silver lilies. He drew the curtain aside, revealing a narrow wooden door hidden within the wall itself. There was no handle on the outside, only an old brass keyhole worn smooth by hands that had not touched it for years. Warren arrived carrying the second lantern. His breathing seemed unusually careful. "Your Grace," he repeated quietly. "Perhaps the library would be more appropriate. We could prepare a chair beside the fireplace." Gideon shook his head once. "No." The old butler lowered his eyes. "As you wish." Gideon inserted the iron key. The lock resisted at first, producing a dull metallic groan that echoed through the chapel. Dust drifted from the stone arch above as he slowly turned the key. Another sharp click followed, then silence. He rested one hand upon the weathered wood but did not push immediately. For the briefest moment his shoulders became perfectly still, as though every memory behind that door had returned at once. Eliza noticed his fingers tighten almost imperceptibly before he finally opened it. The hinges complained softly. Cool air carrying the faint fragrance of dried lavender and cedar escaped into the corridor. Lantern light revealed a beautifully preserved room untouched by time. A bridal gown rested upon a tailor's mannequin beside a tall mirror hidden beneath white linen. Freshness had long vanished from the bouquets decorating the mantel, yet their carefully arranged shapes remained. A pair of satin shoes waited neatly beside an upholstered chair. Books stood upon polished shelves exactly where someone had left them years before. An embroidery hoop rested near the window with unfinished white threads still stretched across delicate fabric. Nothing appeared abandoned. Everything appeared interrupted. Eliza instinctively stopped at the threshold, sensing she had entered a place where time itself refused to continue. "I cannot stay here," she said softly. "This room belongs to someone." Gideon kept his eyes fixed upon the floor. "It belonged to someone." His answer carried a quiet finality that silenced every further question. Warren stared into the room with unmistakable sorrow. 9 years, he murmured almost to himself. "I never believed this door would open again." Gideon stepped backward into the hallway instead of entering alongside her. "The fire still works," he said. "There are blankets inside the wardrobe. You will remain here until the bridge is safe." Eliza looked from the room to the silent Duke. "Thank you, Your Grace." He gave the slightest nod but did not meet her eyes. Instead, he handed her the iron key. The unexpected weight settled into her palm. "Lock the door from the inside," he said quietly. "No one will disturb you tonight." For the first time since she arrived at Blackridge Abbey, Eliza sensed that the key he had placed in her hand unlocked far more than a forgotten room. Somewhere behind Gideon Holloway's calm expression stood a grief that had waited 9 years for someone brave enough to cross its threshold. The room remained perfectly still after the door closed, as though even the storm outside understood it had reached a place where noise no longer belonged. Eliza rested the heavy iron key upon the small writing desk before removing her damp cloak, careful not to disturb anything around her. Every object seemed to possess an invisible boundary of memory. The delicate bridal gown standing beside the tall mirror caught the soft glow of the fireplace, its ivory fabric untouched by time except for a thin layer of dust that shimmered like winter frost. Fresh logs had been stacked neatly beside the hearth years ago, waiting for a fire that had never been lit. She knelt before the fireplace and gently coaxed a small flame to life. Warm light slowly chased the shadows across the walls, revealing shelves filled with well-loved novels, porcelain figurines arranged with remarkable care, and framed sketches of wildflowers gathered from Kentucky hillsides. Whoever had lived here had loved beauty without extravagance. Nothing suggested vanity. Everything suggested quiet joy. Eliza unfolded the blankets Gideon had mentioned and placed them carefully upon the elegant four-poster bed. Even then, she hesitated before sitting down, almost feeling like an intruder inside another woman's unfinished life. Rain continued tapping against the tall windows while distant thunder rolled across the plateau. Her eyes wandered again toward the bridal gown. Something about it unsettled her, though she could not explain why. Years spent working as a seamstress had trained her to notice details others overlooked. She approached the mannequin slowly, keeping her hands behind her back at first. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Every stitch had been placed with patient precision, every lace panel aligned by someone who understood both discipline and love. Yet one section near the left sleeve immediately caught her attention. The embroidery did not quite match the rest. The floral pattern appeared identical from a distance, but one line curved differently beneath the lace. Eliza leaned closer. Her fingertips hovered above the fabric before gently tracing the raised thread. It felt thicker than expected. Almost doubled. She frowned thoughtfully. No experienced seamstress would use such reinforcement unless trying to conceal something beneath decorative stitching. Curiosity battled with propriety. She knew the gown was not hers to examine. It belonged to a painful chapter of the Duke's past, one he had protected for nearly a decade. Yet something deep inside whispered that the garment itself wanted to be understood. Carefully, she carried the dress toward the brighter firelight without removing it from the mannequin. A tiny pair of embroidery scissors rested inside a wooden sewing box upon the nearby table, polished despite years of silence. Eliza did not cut the thread. Instead, she gently separated two overlapping layers of lace using the blunt edge of the scissors. As the fabric shifted slightly, hidden stitches appeared beneath. They were astonishingly small, almost invisible, arranged not as decoration but as letters concealed within the embroidery itself. Her breathing slowed. There, stitched with remarkable patience using thread only a shade darker than ivory, stood three simple words. I did not. She looked again, carefully following the embroidered line farther beneath another fold of lace. Leave. Her heart quickened. One final section disappeared beneath a ribbon fastened at the waist. With trembling care, she loosened the ribbon just enough to reveal the remaining letters. Willingly. Eliza stepped backward, unable to take her eyes from the message hidden inside the wedding gown. Whoever had created it had known no ordinary letter would remain undiscovered. Only another seamstress, someone trained to see through layers of thread and pattern, could ever uncover the truth. Before she could gather her thoughts, a faint sound interrupted the silence. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. They echoed beyond the bedroom door. Eliza instinctively turned toward the entrance. The footsteps stopped directly outside. She held her breath. No knock followed. No voice called her name. Only silence settled across the hallway. Several long seconds passed before another quiet sound reached her ears. Something soft had been placed upon the floor outside the room. Then the footsteps slowly retreated, fading farther down the corridor until only the rain remained. Eliza crossed the room cautiously and rested one hand upon the door without unlocking it. Through the narrow gap beneath the threshold she noticed a warm flicker of candlelight disappear around the corner. After waiting another minute, she finally unlocked the door and opened it only a few inches. The hallway stood empty. Upon the polished stone floor rested a silver tray carrying a steaming teapot, fresh bread, a bowl of vegetable soup, and a single white camellia beside a folded linen napkin. No note accompanied the meal. No servant remained nearby. Eliza quietly lifted the tray and carried it inside before locking the door once more. She looked toward the flower resting beside the teacup, then toward the hidden words still waiting beneath the lace of the unfinished bridal gown. Somewhere beyond these ancient walls, Gideon Holloway carried a grief too heavy to speak aloud. Yet tonight, without a single unnecessary word, he had remembered that a stranger might be hungry before she was afraid. Morning arrived quietly, though the storm had not entirely surrendered. Pale light filtered through the tall chapel windows, washing the forgotten room in soft shades of silver and gold. Eliza had slept only a few hours. The hidden message stitched inside the bridal gown had returned to her thoughts each time she closed her eyes, as though the silent confession refused to remain buried after waiting so many years to be discovered. She carefully folded the blankets, restored every chair to its exact position, and tied the ribbon around the gown exactly as she had found it. No trace of her presence remained except the warmth fading from the fireplace. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. "Miss Hartwell," Warren Bellamy called through the door. "His Grace requests breakfast in the east dining room." Eliza glanced once more at the gown before taking the iron key from the desk. She unlocked the door and stepped into the corridor, placing the key carefully into Warren's waiting hand. The old butler studied her face for a brief moment. "Did you rest well?" he asked. "Better than I deserved," she answered honestly. Warren offered a faint smile, though concern lingered behind his eyes. "Few people have ever crossed that threshold. Fewer still have spent an entire night there." He said nothing more as they walked together through the silent halls. The dining room overlooked the flooded valley below. Rain still clung to the windows, but the clouds had begun to break apart, revealing scattered ribbons of blue sky above the distant hills. Gideon Holloway already sat at the long walnut table with a newspaper folded neatly beside untouched coffee. He rose politely as Eliza entered, neither overly formal nor overly familiar. "Please," he said, motioning toward the chair across from him. "Sit." Breakfast had been prepared with quiet simplicity. Fresh biscuits, apple preserves, scrambled eggs, bacon, sliced peaches, and hot coffee filled the polished silver dishes. Warren poured coffee before withdrawing without a sound, leaving the two of them surrounded only by ticking rain and the occasional crackle from the nearby fireplace. Gideon remained silent for several moments, studying the landscape beyond the windows rather than his guest. Finally he spoke. "The bridge inspectors arrived before sunrise." Eliza looked up. "Can it be repaired today?" "No." His answer was calm. "The current is still too strong. Perhaps tomorrow. Perhaps longer." She nodded once. "Then I shall leave as soon as it is safe." Gideon inclined his head but did not answer immediately. Instead, he unfolded his napkin with measured precision. "Mr. Marlowe will be informed that the delivery was completed." "Thank you. You will receive your payment before you depart." Eliza lowered her eyes toward the untouched coffee. "I appreciate your generosity." The conversation might have ended there had her conscience allowed it. She knew she should remain silent. The room behind the chapel belonged to his private sorrow. The hidden message was not hers to uncover. Yet every stitch she had examined seemed to insist that someone had once trusted the truth to survive inside that fabric. At last she spoke carefully. "Your Grace." Gideon looked toward her for the first time that morning. "The room." He waited. "I noticed something unusual." His expression remained unreadable. "Go on." Eliza chose each word with care. "The bridal gown contains concealed embroidery beneath the lace. It appears intentional." Gideon's hand stopped moving. The spoon resting beside his coffee cup remained suspended for one brief second before he quietly placed it back upon the saucer. "Concealed embroidery?" "Yes." "You examined the dress." It was not a question. "Only because something seemed wrong with the stitching." His voice became quieter than before. "And what exactly did you find?" Eliza hesitated. She had imagined many reactions, but not the complete absence of visible emotion. "Someone stitched a message beneath the lace." Gideon's eyes did not leave hers. "What message?" She drew one slow breath. "I did not leave willingly." Silence settled over the room with startling weight. Outside, sunlight finally broke through the clouds, illuminating the flooded fields beyond Blackridge Abbey. Inside, neither of them moved. Gideon slowly pushed back his chair and stood. Every trace of warmth disappeared from his face. "Miss Hartwell," he said evenly, "that room was closed because the past belongs where it cannot continue harming the living." Eliza immediately rose as well. "I understand." "No," he replied softly. "You do not." He turned toward the window, folding both hands behind his back. "The bridge will be repaired as quickly as possible." His words carried unmistakable finality. "Until then, you are asked to remain away from the western wing." Eliza felt disappointment more than offense. "Of course, Your Grace." She reached for her gloves, intending to leave without another word. Before she reached the doorway, Gideon spoke once more, his voice almost too quiet to hear. "Tell me one thing." She stopped. "Did the message bear a signature?" Eliza turned slowly. "Only initials." He closed his eyes for the briefest moment. "What were they?" "B.H." Gideon's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. For several long seconds he remained perfectly still, staring through the rain-covered glass toward the distant hills where the broken bridge disappeared into morning mist. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded older than it had the night before. "That room belonged to my sister." The words lingered between them long after Gideon fell silent. Eliza had expected sorrow, perhaps even anger, but not the profound weariness that settled across his face. It was the expression of a man who had spent years carrying a burden too heavy to set down and too painful to examine. He remained standing before the rain-streaked windows, watching the swollen river far below as though the current carried memories no one else could see. Her name was Beatrice Holloway, he said at last. She was 5 years older than I was, and she believed every broken thing deserved another chance. Injured birds, abandoned dogs, neglected gardens, forgotten people. She filled this house with laughter until it became difficult to remember that silence had ever lived here. His voice never trembled, yet every sentence seemed carefully measured, as though speaking too quickly might disturb the past itself. Eliza listened without interruption. She was to be married in the chapel, Gideon continued quietly. The room where you spent the night was prepared for her on the morning of the ceremony. Her dress was completed. The flowers arrived before sunrise. Guests filled the estate. Then, before the vows were spoken, she disappeared. He lowered his eyes toward the polished wooden floor. By evening, rumors had already spread across 3 counties. People claimed she had run away with another man. They said she had stolen family bonds and abandoned both her name and her future. Eliza remembered the hidden stitches beneath the lace. Did you believe them? Gideon did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his honesty carried more pain than pride. I believed the evidence placed before me. The room grew still again. Letters appeared that suggested she intended to leave. Financial records could not be found. Witnesses claimed they had seen her near the southern road before dawn. Everything pointed toward the same conclusion. He looked toward the distant hills beyond the windows. I was young. I believed facts were always truthful simply because they appeared orderly. Eliza folded her hands together. And afterward? Afterward, I locked the room. A faint, bitter smile crossed his face without reaching his eyes. At first I told myself it would remain closed until someone discovered where she had gone. Weeks became months. Months became years. Eventually the locked door became easier to live with than the unanswered questions behind it. He turned toward her at last. No servant was permitted inside. No furniture was moved. Nothing was discarded. His gaze drifted briefly toward the western wing beyond the dining room walls. If I could not bring my sister home, I could at least prevent time from erasing the place where she had last been happy. Eliza felt the quiet weight of those words settle deep within her heart. She understood fabric. She understood stitches. She understood how tiny threads could hold together something that appeared whole from a distance while concealing damage beneath the surface. Families, she realized, were often no different. Your Grace, she said gently. Someone who intended to abandon everything would not spend hours hiding a message where only another seamstress might one day discover it. Those stitches required patience. Hope. Trust that the truth would survive. Gideon studied her with thoughtful silence. You are very certain. I am certain only about thread. Her answer carried quiet humility. It does not lie. Hands may shake. Memories may fail. But stitches always reveal the intention of the person who placed them. Before Gideon could respond, hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor outside. Warren Bellamy appeared in the doorway, breathing slightly faster than usual, though he remained perfectly composed. Forgive the interruption, Your Grace. Gideon straightened immediately. What is it? Mr. Russell Marlowe has arrived. Eliza felt her stomach tighten. Warren continued. He insists upon seeing Miss Hartwell immediately. He claims she left his employment without permission and says there are matters requiring your attention as the owner of the estate where she is presently staying. Gideon's expression hardened, though his voice remained calm. Did he explain why this could not wait until the roads reopened? Warren hesitated. He stated that a valuable piece of jewelry disappeared from his workshop yesterday afternoon. The old butler looked briefly toward Eliza before returning his attention to the Duke. He believes Miss Hartwell knows where it is. Eliza's face paled, more from disbelief than fear. I have never taken anything from his workshop, she said quietly. Gideon looked directly into her eyes, searching for something beyond words alone. She did not lower her gaze. She did not defend herself with hurried explanations. She simply stood with the same quiet dignity she had carried into Blackridge Abbey through the storm. After a long moment, Gideon turned back to Warren. Show Mr. Marlowe to the library? Yes, Your Grace. Warren bowed and withdrew. Gideon reached for his coat but paused before leaving the room. Without looking back, he spoke in a voice so calm that it carried greater weight than anger ever could. Until I have heard every side of the matter, no one under my roof will be judged by accusation alone. The library of Blackridge Abbey carried the quiet authority of generations. Floor-to-ceiling shelves disappeared into shadow above polished oak paneling, while rain tapped softly against the tall windows overlooking the flooded valley. Russell Marlowe stood beside the fireplace with his hat still in his hands, dressed in an expensive charcoal coat that seemed chosen to impress rather than protect against the weather. His smile appeared courteous, yet his sharp eyes never stopped measuring the room. Judge Amos Crane occupied a chair nearby, his walking cane resting across his knees as though he had come merely to witness a formal discussion. When Gideon entered, both men rose. Your Grace, Marlowe said with an elegant bow. Forgive this unexpected intrusion. Gideon acknowledged him with a brief nod before taking his place beside the long library table. Mr. Marlowe. Judge Crane. Warren informed me that this matter concerns Miss Hartwell. Unfortunately, it does. Marlowe sighed with practiced disappointment. A diamond mourning brooch commissioned by one of my most distinguished clients vanished yesterday afternoon. Miss Hartwell left my workshop shortly before the loss was discovered. Gideon folded his hands calmly. Do you possess evidence that she took it? Marlowe smiled politely. Evidence often begins with opportunity. Opportunity is not proof. The merchant's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. She departed without completing her employment. She departed to deliver a commission gown to this estate. Gideon's voice remained measured. That assignment originated from your own workshop. Marlowe inclined his head. Naturally. Yet desperation leads respectable people toward unfortunate decisions. Miss Hartwell has struggled financially for some time. Her late mother's medical expenses became widely known. Poverty can tempt even honorable souls. The words settled heavily inside the room. Gideon neither interrupted nor accepted them. Bring Miss Hartwell here, he instructed Warren quietly. Moments later, Eliza entered the library with steady steps. She greeted the judge respectfully before meeting Marlowe's gaze without resentment. Good morning, Mr. Marlowe. Miss Hartwell. His smile carried no warmth. Perhaps you would kindly explain where the brooch is. I cannot explain the location of something I have never seen. You expect us to believe that? I expect only the truth. Marlowe walked slowly across the Persian rug, stopping several feet from her. You worked beside the finishing table yesterday. Yes. You remained after the others left for lunch. Because the gown needed to be completed before the storm. So you were alone? For less than 15 minutes. Long enough. Eliza answered every question without raising her voice. She neither defended herself with emotion nor accused anyone in return. Her composure seemed only to irritate Marlowe further. Your Grace, he finally said, turning toward Gideon, I have respected your family's name for many years. Surely you recognize the danger of allowing someone under suspicion to remain within your household. Gideon regarded him silently before asking a single question. Did you search her belongings before she departed? Of course. Did you find the brooch? Marlowe hesitated. No. Did anyone witness her placing it among her possessions? No. Has any law officer accused her formally? Not yet. Gideon rose from his chair. The movement was calm, yet the atmosphere within the library changed immediately. Then at present, he said evenly, Miss Hartwell is guilty only of being poor. Judge Crane shifted uneasily but remained silent. Marlowe's polite smile disappeared. Your Grace, I merely seek cooperation. You have it. Gideon stepped closer, his expression composed but unmistakably firm. Every room in Blackridge Abbey is open to inspection. Every servant may be questioned. If lawful evidence appears, I shall not interfere with justice. He paused before adding, but no guest beneath my roof will be condemned because suspicion finds convenient shelter in poverty. The silence that followed felt heavier than the storm clouds still lingering beyond the windows. Eliza lowered her eyes, not because she felt ashamed, but because gratitude threatened to reveal itself too plainly. She had expected to defend herself alone, as she always had. Instead, someone with every reason to protect only his own reputation had chosen fairness before convenience. Marlowe adjusted his gloves slowly. "Very well," he said. "Perhaps additional facts will emerge." Gideon met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps they will." The merchant bowed stiffly before turning toward the door. As he reached the threshold, his eyes lingered briefly on Eliza with an expression too calculating to be called disappointment. Then he departed with Judge Crane into the fading rain. Warren closed the library doors behind them. The room became quiet once more. Gideon looked toward Eliza. "You intended to leave the moment the bridge reopened, did you not?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Would you still leave if doing so placed you directly back into Mr. Marlowe's hands?" Eliza answered honestly. "If remaining here endangered your name, I would." Gideon considered her reply for several long seconds before walking toward the rain-covered window. "Names recover," he said quietly. "Character is far more difficult to restore once it has been abandoned." The rain finally surrendered by late afternoon, leaving Blackridge Abbey wrapped in a quiet mist that drifted across the limestone cliffs like pale ribbons of memory. Sunlight filtered through the clouds for the first time in 2 days, touching the ancient stone walls with a warmth the estate seemed almost reluctant to accept. Eliza spent the morning helping Warren Bellamy mend several worn table linens, grateful for work that occupied both her hands and her thoughts. Yet the hidden message stitched inside Beatrice Holloway's bridal gown refused to leave her mind. Every careful stitch she had examined carried the unmistakable intention of someone determined that the truth would survive long after her own voice had been silenced. As evening approached, Warren paused beside the sewing table and regarded Eliza thoughtfully. "There is something I have wondered for many years," he admitted quietly. "If Miss Beatrice truly wished to disappear, why did she leave every personal possession behind except the clothes she wore that morning?" Eliza slowly set down her needle. "Because perhaps she never intended to leave at all." The old butler lowered his eyes. His Grace asked himself that question countless times. Eventually sorrow became easier than hope. Those words lingered with Eliza as she found herself standing once more outside the hidden room beyond the family chapel. This time the door stood slightly open. Gideon had not ordered it closed again. The fading sunlight entered through the tall window, revealing countless tiny dust particles drifting peacefully through the still air. The unfinished bridal gown waited exactly where she had left it. Eliza approached it once more, not searching for another secret but hoping to understand the first one more completely. She carefully studied the embroidery surrounding the concealed sentence. Something else seemed unusual. The decorative vines flowing across the skirt followed no ordinary floral pattern. Instead, they curved in deliberate angles unlike any design she had ever stitched. She tilted the fabric toward the light. Suddenly the arrangement changed before her eyes. The embroidered branches no longer resembled flowers. They resembled narrow passageways. Her heartbeat quickened. She hurried to the writing desk and unfolded a blank sheet of paper. With careful precision she sketched every unusual line hidden beneath the lace until the entire pattern appeared before her. It was not decoration. It was a map. Before she could consider what it might represent, a calm voice spoke from the doorway. "You found something else." Eliza turned. Gideon stood quietly at the entrance, his expression unreadable, though this time he did not remain outside the threshold. After a long hesitation, he stepped into the room for the first time in 9 years. His eyes wandered across the familiar furniture before settling upon the bridal gown. Pain crossed his face so briefly that another person might never have noticed it. Eliza silently handed him the paper. He studied the drawing for several moments. Then his expression changed. "This is not random stitching." "No." She pointed gently toward one curved line. "These markings resemble corridors. They connect to this larger chamber." Gideon looked toward the chapel wall beyond the window. "The old wine cellar." He traced another line with his finger. And this could be the tunnel beneath the eastern foundation. Warren entered quietly carrying fresh candles. His eyes widened as he noticed Gideon standing inside the room. Neither man acknowledged the significance of that single step, yet both understood it without words. Gideon handed the sketch to the old butler. "Have you ever seen this before?" Warren studied it carefully before slowly shaking his head. "No, Your Grace." Then his gaze settled upon one small embroidered symbol near the edge of the page. His face lost its color. "Wait." He pointed with trembling fingers. "That mark." Gideon looked up immediately. "What is it?" "When I was a young footman, the builders used that exact symbol to identify hidden storage passages beneath the abbey. They said only members of the Holloway family knew every entrance." Silence filled the room. Gideon looked back toward the bridal gown. Beatrice stitched directions where no one would think to search. Eliza nodded slowly. She expected that someday someone who understood needlework would find them. Gideon folded the sketch with extraordinary care before slipping it into the inside pocket of his coat. "Then tomorrow," he said quietly, "we begin searching where my family stopped looking 9 years ago." Outside, the last rays of sunlight slipped across the ancient stone chapel, while inside the room that had once preserved only grief now guarded something far more powerful. It no longer held only memories of what had been lost. It held the first fragile promise that the truth had never truly disappeared. It had simply been waiting for the right hands to unravel the thread. The following morning arrived clear and cool, as though the storm had washed years of silence from the hills surrounding Blackridge Abbey. Thin ribbons of mist drifted above the valley while sunlight spilled across the old limestone walls, revealing details that had remained hidden beneath rain and shadow. Gideon Holloway stood waiting outside the chapel entrance before dawn, a lantern in one hand and the carefully folded sketch from Beatrice's bridal gown in the other. When Eliza joined him, she noticed he had exchanged his formal coat for a plain wool jacket better suited to exploring forgotten corners of the estate. "Mr. Bellamy has already unlocked the old cellar," he said quietly. "No one has entered it in years." Together they descended a narrow stone staircase beneath the chapel. The air grew cooler with every step, carrying the familiar scent of cedar barrels, limestone, and earth untouched by sunlight. Warren walked ahead with another lantern, occasionally brushing away loose cobwebs from the low ceiling. The ancient wine cellar stretched farther than Eliza had imagined, its rows of empty racks disappearing into darkness. Gideon unfolded the sketch beside one of the stone pillars. "According to Beatrice's stitching, the hidden passage should begin somewhere behind this wall." Warren studied the rough blocks carefully before stopping beside a weathered carving almost erased by time. "I remember this mark," he whispered. "The builders said it pointed toward emergency passages used during the earliest days of the abbey." Gideon ran his hand slowly across the cold stone until his fingers paused upon one block that felt smoother than the others. With gentle pressure, it shifted inward by less than an inch. A soft, grinding sound echoed through the cellar. Dust drifted into the lantern light as part of the wall slowly moved aside, revealing a narrow passage just wide enough for one person to walk through. None of them spoke for several moments. It seemed impossible that such a place had remained hidden beneath the abbey for generations. Gideon lifted the lantern higher. "Stay close." The passage sloped gently downward before turning beneath the eastern foundation. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, forming tiny pools that reflected the warm glow of their lanterns. Along one wall, faded chalk markings appeared at regular intervals. Eliza recognized the same unusual symbols she had copied from the bridal gown. "She truly left directions," she murmured. "She wanted someone to find this." After nearly 50 feet, the passage widened into a small stone chamber. An old wooden chest rested against the far wall beneath a shelf carved directly into the limestone. Time had darkened the wood, but the brass lock remained intact. Gideon knelt beside it. The lock had long ago rusted open. Inside lay several leather-bound account books wrapped carefully in oilcloth, a packet of sealed letters tied with faded blue ribbon, and a velvet pouch containing certificates bearing the Holloway family seal. Gideon carefully opened one ledger. His expression hardened with quiet disbelief. "These are the missing financial records," he said. "The bonds everyone believed Beatrice stole." Warren crossed himself softly. "Then she never took them." Eliza lifted one of the letters with extraordinary care. The seal had already been broken years before. She unfolded the brittle paper just enough to read the first lines. It was addressed to Beatrice in careful handwriting. The letter warned her that certain financial documents had been altered and urged her not to trust anyone connected with Russell Marlowe's former business partners. Gideon closed his eyes briefly before taking a slow breath. "She tried to protect this family." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "And I believed she had betrayed it." Before anyone could speak again, hurried footsteps echoed faintly from the passage behind them. Warren turned immediately toward the sound. A young stable hand appeared, breathing hard after running through the tunnel. "Your Grace," he said between careful breaths. "Forgive me. Mr. Marlowe has returned." Gideon stood at once. "Why?" "He says he has come to collect Miss Hartwell personally because the bridge is expected to reopen before sunset." The young man hesitated before continuing. "He also says the county sheriff will accompany him if necessary." Silence settled over the hidden chamber. Gideon's gaze moved from the recovered records to the letters resting in Eliza's hands. The evidence proving Beatrice's innocence had finally surfaced, yet revealing it too soon might place every discovery at risk before its meaning could be fully understood. Eliza carefully folded the letter and returned it to the chest. "If Mr. Marlowe believes I know nothing," she said quietly, "he may reveal far more than he intends." Gideon looked at her with growing respect. For the first time since they had met, he no longer saw only a stranded seamstress seeking shelter. He saw a woman whose courage remained steady even when uncertainty stood directly before her. He closed the lid of the chest with deliberate care. "Then we will let him believe the thread is still hidden," he said, "until the truth is strong enough to stand on its own." By late afternoon the county sheriff arrived at Blackridge Abbey, not with drawn conclusions but with quiet patience earned through many years of service. Gideon welcomed him into the library, where the recovered account books, the sealed letters, and the Holloway family certificates rested neatly upon the long walnut table. Judge Amos Crane, summoned once more at Gideon's request, examined each document carefully while Warren Bellamy stood nearby in respectful silence. Russell Marlowe entered with the same polished confidence he had worn before, but it slowly faded as one ledger after another revealed altered figures, missing transfers, and signatures that no longer matched the official records preserved inside the county archives. One letter, written in Beatrice Holloway's unmistakable hand, described her discovery of financial deception and her decision to hide the original documents where only someone skilled with needlework might someday uncover the truth. Another letter confirmed that she had intended to meet a trusted minister before her wedding morning to expose everything publicly, but circumstances had forced her to leave the abbey before she could return. The room remained quiet as the sheriff compared the recovered papers with copies he had requested from the courthouse earlier that morning. When he finally closed the last ledger, he looked toward Gideon with calm certainty. "These records deserve a formal investigation," he said. "Miss Holloway's name should never have carried the burden it has carried for so many years." Russell Marlowe attempted to object, insisting that misunderstandings could exist inside records nearly a decade old, but his confidence no longer convinced anyone present. The sheriff politely informed him that further questions would be handled through the proper legal process, and invited him to accompany him back to town. Without raised voices or unnecessary spectacle, the merchant realized the conversation had ended. He collected his hat with unsteady hands, glanced once toward Eliza, then quietly departed beside the sheriff. The heavy front doors closed behind them, leaving Blackridge Abbey wrapped once again in peaceful silence. Gideon remained standing beside the library window long after the carriage disappeared down the winding road. "I spent 9 years believing my sister had abandoned this family," he said softly. "In truth, she tried to protect it." Warren lowered his head. "She would have been proud that you chose to listen before judging another innocent person." Gideon looked toward Eliza. "No. That lesson belonged to someone else. The following morning brought clear skies and the welcome news that the bridge had finally reopened. A carriage waited in the front courtyard, prepared to take Eliza wherever she wished to go. She carried her small suitcase down the stone steps while Warren placed a neatly wrapped parcel beside it. "Fresh bread for the journey," the old butler said with a warm smile. "And perhaps enough preserves to remind you that this house is capable of sweeter days." Eliza thanked him sincerely before turning toward Gideon, who stood quietly near the entrance beneath the ancient archway. The morning sunlight reached places that had remained hidden in shadow only days before. Even the old chapel windows seemed brighter. "You have already given me more kindness than I can repay," Eliza said. "I hope peace returns to this home." Gideon looked at the carriage, then back toward the western wing where the hidden room waited with its door standing open. "Yesterday," he said thoughtfully, "I walked into that room without fear for the first time in 9 years. He paused before continuing. "Not because the grief disappeared, but because the truth finally entered with me." He reached into his coat and placed a small brass key in her hand. It was not the heavy iron key that had first opened the forgotten room, but a different one, polished by careful use. "The old tailor's workshop beside the eastern gardens has stood empty for years," he explained. "If you choose to remain, it is yours to restore. You once told me that stitches never lie. I believe this estate could use more honest hands." Eliza looked from the key to the quiet building visible beyond the blooming white camellias. It was not a gift offered from pity, nor a favor granted out of obligation. It was an invitation to build something of her own. She smiled gently. "Only if I earn the right to keep it." Gideon returned the first genuine smile she had ever seen upon his face. "You already have." Weeks later, the abandoned workshop welcomed its first customers, and the sound of sewing machines and quiet laughter drifted once more across the abbey grounds. The hidden room behind the chapel was no longer locked. Its windows stood open each morning, allowing fresh air and sunlight to replace years of silence. The unfinished bridal gown remained carefully preserved, not as a monument to sorrow but as a reminder that truth can survive inside the smallest thread when courage refuses to let it unravel. Visitors who came to Blackridge Abbey often admired the peaceful gardens without ever realizing that the greatest restoration had not happened in the stone walls or the old buildings. It had happened inside two wounded hearts that discovered healing in the simplest act of opening a door for someone who had nowhere else to go. Some doors protect us from the weather, but the rarest ones teach us that home is not the place where sorrow begins. It is the place where truth is finally welcomed inside.